So, hello everyone. This is the general introduction on fallacies. There are also specific clips on specific kind of fallacies, and these clips are categorized by the kind of rules for a discussion that are violated by these fallacies. So, if you're looking for them, then go to the other clips. Anyway, when you're thinking about fallacies, one good question to ask yourself is what There we go. What is a fallacy? And so while you're thinking about this, let me tell you what it is not. So, to just be clear, a weak argument is not necessarily the same as a fallacy. A fallacy is also not necessarily a weak argument, but let me explain the first point first. Let me explain it by means of an example. So take a look at this argumentation. We have a person saying the party was perfect, and it was perfect because, so there follows an argument, there were nice people. Now, for a party to really be perfect, there must probably be more than just nice people. Maybe there was good music or good food, good atmosphere. This is not really very strong. But on the other hand, there's nothing really wrong with this argument. So what we can tell you now, or what I can tell you now, what we can say is that this is sort of a weak argument, but it's not really fallacious. So when you think about fallaciousness, then and what it is, you could, for instance, look it up in the dictionary. So this is what I've already done for you. So we have the Oxford English Dictionary here, and the entry for fallacy, and it says a fallacy is a deceptive or misleading argument, a sophism. And what is nice about this definition is that we see that fallacies are committed in argumentation. So for instance, you could say something like chocolate cannot be healthy and give the reason that it is far too tasty. Now you can see that this doesn't really hold, it shouldn't convince you, because the tastiness of chocolate cannot determine whether it's unhealthy or not. There are loads of things that are very tasty, but not really healthy. So it's confusing actually, this argument, this particular fallacy we call an ad consequentiam fallacy. And what happens here is that there's a descriptive claim in the standpoint, so a factual claim, a claim about the healthiness of a particular kind of food, chocolate, but it's supported by an evaluative claim. And that can actually never happen. It's the same as in the argument, it cannot be raining because we're going out for a picnic. Now, you don't want it to be raining, but it still can be raining while you want to go out for a picnic. So here the same reasoning mistake is made. So we have the nice part about this definition that it is part of an argument. Fallacies occur in arguments. Another nice thing is that it emphasizes the deceptive nature of fallacies. In other words, fallacies can be difficult to detect. And that's, by the way, also the reason why people speculate that that fallacies are still committed. If it were easy to detect fallacies, then no one would commit them because, you would just lose the argument. Another neat link here in this definition is the link that is made with sophisms or sophists. And we discussed those people in the very first class of this course. So fallacies are somehow historically linked to the sophists. And just to refresh your memory, I'll show you the skill here that I made myself here. So it's not really well skilled, but anyway, you see that we have the 5th century BCE here as a start, and it continues till 100 CE. But the nice thing here is that we see here are the sophists. This little gentleman here, he is called Gorgias, and here we have Protagoras, and they were these traveling teachers of rhetoric that had much work to do in the 5th century BCE or 4th maybe, when there was the rise of democracy, and every man who was not a slave and was born in the city-state, for instance, the city-state of Athens, could participate in policy deliberation. So they could, for instance, propose a particular law or a particular kind of policy, and if they argued well for it, the policy or law would be adopted. And all this was going on orally, so that made being skilled in rhetoric very, very important. And these sophists, they were a group of different kind of teachers of rhetoric, and these teachers were generally people that just spoke very well in public. So they were hired by people of power, or people who would like to become powerful, to educate their sons to be as powerful or become even more powerful as them. So that's why there was a rise of these needs for the sophists to be teaching. Anyway, maybe just to remark here, Aristotle is a very relevant name to say here with respect to fallacies, because he didn't like the teachings of the sophists at all. He says, well, they are sometimes really sort of unreasonable tricks that they teach, and it's not good. And so what Aristotle did, he was the first that we know of who constructed a systematized list of fallacies, of 13 fallacies, and some of them we still know, such as circular reasoning or begging the question. And he was the one who sort of laid down the study of fallacies in that sense. Anyway, I'm taking too long, so back to the definition. So we have these important features of this definition of a fallacy, but there's a but. And the but I can illustrate with this little conversation. A says to B, why are you against euthanasia? And B says, I'm sorry, but as a matter of principle, I'm not going to discuss euthanasia with you. Now you see that this somehow is a little bit difficult for the discussion, because B doesn't want to provide any arguments actually in this discussion, which, well, it makes resolving a difference of opinion really, really difficult. And for that reason, actually, it's called a fallacy. It's regarded as the fallacy of declaring the standpoint taboo. But the interesting thing here is that it is, by definition, not an argument. Arguments are not given because the standpoint is declared taboo. So this definition provided by the OED is a little bit too limited in a sense. And that's actually why we should look at maybe the chapters that you read for today, so chapter 7 and chapter 8 of the argumentation book. And there we see that the pragma-dialectical argumentation theory, because that's the theory that is explained in that book, regards a fallacy a bit more specifically, and in a sense also a little bit more generally. So it's more specific and more general, but in any case, a fallacy, according to pragma-dialectics, is a discussion move that frustrates or hinders the reasonable resolution of a difference of opinion by violating the rules for a critical discussion. So it's a bit more general, because they're talking about a discussion move instead of an argument. So in this way, it is more general. But it's also more specific, because they're talking about rules for a critical discussion and the difference of opinion. And this difference of opinion can even be hindered maybe by committing a fallacy. So in that sense, it's more specific. In any case, what this means for this example, so the euthanasia example, is, for instance, that there's a rule for a critical discussion violated by it, and that is the so-called freedom rule, which reads, parties must not prevent each other from putting forward standpoints or casting doubt on standpoints. And a nice overview, by the way, if you use this 2017 book, you can find on pages 163 and 164. And that's an overview of the critical discussion rules. So here, a freedom rule. violation. Now, what I should stress about these rules, there are 10, so they're sometimes called, sort of rather jokingly, the 10 commandments. But anyway, what I should say about these discussion rules is that they are ideal rules, so they indicate how a difference of opinion should ideally be solved. And the other thing is, and that's related to it, but following these rules does not guarantee success. In other words, if you follow the rules, it doesn't really necessarily mean that you resolve your difference of opinion with the other party. It could be that the other party is still not convinced. So in that way, it's not a sort of recipe for success. Now, based on this idea, you can then see that this argument here by B could actually be regarded as fallacious. Question now is which fallacy? So in fact we have A saying you should stop. Oh, you should stop smoking. It should say stop. Wait. You should stop. Okay, editing the text while we're teaching. Very, very good. You should stop smoking here. And then B says, well, that's rich coming from you. You smoke yourself. And the interesting thing here is that exactly the same rule that we mentioned just before is actually violated, the freedom rule. And the reason for this is that B sort of tries to exclude A from the discussion here, because B says, well, you smoke, so you can't tell me to stop smoking. Now, the thing is that actually this is not really reasonable argumentation. It might seem like that, but that's because fallacies are deceptive. But when you think about this, maybe A is really the right person to say, oh, you should stop smoking, because A has experience with all the negative consequences of smoking. So in fact, it's really maybe weird to say that you shouldn't, of B, that A shouldn't say something, because A is maybe the best authority to say something about quitting smoking. Okay, so anyway, this argument, maybe you recognize it, but if not, then I'll tell you it's an ad hominem argument, an ad hominem fallacy of the tu quoque variant. So it means the you too variant actually. So you do it to yourself, so you can't tell me what to do here. So if you want to know more about these specific kind of fallacies, take a look at the other clips. For now, I hope this is clear, and if not, please let me know via email on the discussion board in Blackboard, or maybe during our question time during class hours. Okay, thanks for listening and stay in touch.